an educational series on cybersecurity, compliance, and IT governance. Produced with the support of Freedom Technologies, Phoenix's leading managed service provider.
Just want to take a few minutes here and talk about quantum computing. And I titled this Quantum Physics Update because, you know, I got my start in 1981 with analog systems and moved up into binary and digital, and we kind of heard something about quantum way back then, about it's on the horizon and there's things underway. But when you talk about quantum computing, you really have to look holistically at quantum physics if you really want to know what makes this stuff tick. It's just linear. You need to get at the physics level and then into the applications and see where the industry is going. You know, and when I first started down this path and really started digging in on it in 2010, it was pretty easy to do these types of presentations because everything was moving down a predictable path. There was a lot of noise what quantum physics is, and a lot of things that were out that were just BS, put it lightly. And so what's happening now is we've really reached a point where it's not marching down one single lane of a freeway. It's literally starburst. It's exploding in every direction. And so the good news is I had a lot of material to select from. The bad news is that it's hard to boil that down into a 50-minute presentation. But the good news is it's just really interesting as all get out. So I'm going to try to touch on a little bit of the physics part of this, a little bit of the system side of this, and talk about the industry, key players, and then finish it off with where we're headed to the best of my ability at this point, as well as some resources that we all can take a look at and just to stay abreast of this pretty topic. As you saw in the invite, these are the topics that I'll cover tonight. And I'll keep a little time bar going so you know where we are in the presentation. So an update on quantum computing progress to date. I am going to use a couple slides from my previous presentation just because there may be some people that this is their first time seeing anything about quantum systems. So I'll just touch on those quickly just to reorient, and then you certainly go off and do your own education and try to get up to speed on the physics side of this. As we looked at the timelines, and I've got a couple of them out here, we can see that this is marching down a pretty predictable path. If you cut the noise away, and I'll try to do that in this presentation, I do believe we truly are in this system phase of 2015 to 2025. We are at the system level engineering. And it kind of reminds me of .com, when everything was shaking out and everything in the world was possible, and then it kind of settled into what it is. And that's where we are right now. Here's another take a look at a timeline here. If you focus right around the 2020 area, D-Wave, Canada is hot and heavy. These guys are moving very fast and developing, selling, leasing, coming up with not only the technical models and the research and advancement models, but also the application, the business models, the government, the military applications, as well as scientific research, and even some things to do with exploring the universe. So there's a lot going on out here. Here's a pretty good look at a timeline. If you look at what IBM is doing in particular, and you can see the number of qubits, it's all in pursuit of the qubits because every qubit that gets added to the equation really brings exponential power to what quantum system is able to do. And so this matches up with the other slides that I've already shown as where we're headed. IBM is another very, I'm sure people online that have gone on to the test site at IBM and had a chance to run some routines on some of the quantum systems that are available. I want to dispel some of the common myths and misunderstandings. Most of these myths are taking place at the physics level. You'll hear things like an item, a particle can be in two places at the same time. It can be in two states at the same time. And it gets a little murky between what a state is and what a attribute is. There's experiments that are out there, I'm sure you're all familiar with, the act of observing an item, a particle, and when it becomes a particle and when it becomes a wave. There's a lot of experiments that are out there. The double slit experiment is probably the most popular. It's been repeated over and over and over since Einstein. It is true. The particle wave portion of that is true. Exactly what's causing that, depending on who you're talking to, you're going to get different answers. I have my own theories on that, what causes that, but my take on it is just accept it that it is a phenomenon that does happen. And so what do you do with that phenomenon? We'll let guys that are a lot smarter than me figure out why that is. So I didn't really want to focus on the physics side of these misunderstandings. It's more really about where we're headed. And that's why I selected these items in here. And I hope that you guys had a chance to read through some of these items while I was talking. I think bullet number 3, quantum computers will be commonplace in 20 years. People have been saying this for a long time, and it just hasn't really developed up into anything that we would call tangible until now. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm seeing what's going on, and it really is starting to get some teeth and some legs, and it is starting to move. When you get down in these bullets where it says quantum communications will be important, the act of entanglement, and I apologize if I'm repeating myself from a last presentation, or if you guys are up to speed on this already, but go ahead and Google or YouTube entanglement, and there's a lot of books out there on that as well. The Chinese are hot and heavy on the entanglement piece of this, and it's pretty fascinating. So when we talk about communications, just center any research that you might be doing around the quantum entanglement piece of that. And then finally, if you want to go way off the charts, at the last one, quantum machines could become conscious. I don't see anything relevant to that at this time, but hey, I'm an open thinker, so we'll see what happens. So these are just some of the myths that you see out there. So when we look at the next two items, quantum encryption fundamentals and how quantum encryption compares to common or classical encryption, this is where I just wanted to revisit a couple slides and talk about, well, what do they look like? This is what a quantum system looks like. This is D-Wave. You peel the cover off and you've got the system suspended. And a lot of that suspension, almost like a chandelier, is because it's very, very delicate, and it really needs to be isolated away from vibrations, the temperature controls, the power source. All of these things are super critical because they're really operating at a subatomic level, and you're dealing with photons and electrons, and it could throw off a lot of computing or a lot of errors if it's not done properly. So you see this hanging and suspended. And yes, there is chips involved in this. It's not all lights and lasers and microwaves, however they are present. There's your standard binary server, digital ones, using traditional ones and O's. Google says that their quantum computer is 100 million times faster. I would challenge that and say it's not really running faster, it's just bulking the information that's getting processed through the processor. It's not really that faster, it just appears that way. And of course, here on the left panel is a closer look at the system itself. Here's a spaghetti, here's some wafers. Nitrogen, because this needs to operate specifically at a negative 459.67 degrees Fahrenheit, because you want to, in the world of physics, you want to slow everything down as close to absolute zero as you possibly can. so that photons and electrons can be isolated, measured, viewed to determine what's called their spin state. So here's an IBM Q. Again, you see it's suspended. Classical computing on the left, as we all know, it's ones and O's. It's pretty straightforward. And at the bottom, you see this classical 4-bit byte. Somebody pointed out, you know, that's called a nibble. Again, I grew up, my first introduction was through the military, and we dealt with a lot of different size bytes. And so we would just always call out how many bytes there were in that particular set that we were looking at. You know, a communications bit might be 8 plus 1 stop, 1 start, and 1 parity bit type of thing. So I guess it's left over from the 80s. I always call out exactly how many bits are in that byte. Over on the quantum side, if we take a photon or electron and we take a look at its spin state, it's going to spin up or spin down. That's pretty natural. It gives us a 1 or a 0. This is where the fun starts, because without knowing the exact spin up, spin down position of a particle, so picture a bowling ball spinning. If it spins one direction, we call it spin up. If it spins the other direction, we call it spin down. So it's very analogous to a traditional bit. And so the question is, so what if it's traditional, it looks like a traditional bit, then why go through all the hassle of photons, electrons, phosphorus, and all this stuff? It's because when we don't know the exact state of a particle's spin, it allows us to apply probabilities. And when we can apply probabilities, we can apply math, some pretty advanced math to those probabilities. We increase the amount of possibilities. We take it away from a 1 and a 0, 2 states, and we can increase that almost to an infinity. It passes through an infinite number of statistical probabilities. And this is where the real power of this really comes in. So when we don't know if it's spinning up, a particle is spinning up or spinning down, picture an electron spinning. If we don't really know that spin up, spin down, we don't know if it's a 1 or 0, and we start to apply those statistics. That's when we call it superposition. It could be 1, it could be 0. If it was spinning, if I flipped a quarter, it would have a never-ending array of possibilities of spinning up or spinning down, and that's where I can start applying some pretty advanced math against that. So we call that, when it's in a superposition, when we don't know exactly if it's a 1 or a 0, and that's the value. So I'm kind of really harping on this one because I want to make that's the beauty of quantum physics. If we know if 1 or a 0, we say that the system has collapsed because we remove our ability to apply advanced math, and we remove our ability to say this is an array of endless possibilities or probabilities of what state that's in, and all of our math goes away, and all we have is just a regular classical computer that's really expensive and really cold. So I hope that makes sense. So when a cube is in a superposition of both 1 and 0 at the same time, we call that a superposition. And by the way, we see this qubit, Q-U-B-I-T and Q-B-I-T for people that are spelling, like to talk about spelling. This is an example of an electron or a photon in its spin state. And you can see that it's got a 50% probability of spinning up or spinning down in this particular case. So due to probability, qubits are in some, none, or all states and places at the same time. We do not and we cannot know the state of a qubit or its entire system of probability collapses. Okay. By the way, just a little side note, we do have the ability to alter the state we can force a qubit into a spin using microwaves. But again, now you apply statistics. So I think they're going to, do something with this someday. It's just nice to know that you can, through electromagnetic, alter those states. A classical computer on the left is going to have a string of ones and zeros. If I was trying to find a difficult password or process one at a time, so it's going to go through in byte scenario, it's going to take all the probabilities and it's through each probability one at a time. Or is correct? Is this correct? No. Until it finally reaches that password is. So this is pretty linear. It's job oriented. It does one job next, then the next, then the next. And yes, I know there's multitasking, multi-threading, but at basic level, this is how your classical computer is going to try to solve for qubits. So finally, I get to my answer after 28 hours. Hey, I could get it on the first try, or it might take a lot longer. In this example, 28 hours is probably a little bit of exaggeration, but it's going to take a long time to get through all the probabilities. So yeah, I love qubits 8 password on this one. If I go over to the quantum system, I can take all of my superpositions bits all at one time and place them into the quantum system and let it process in bulk all of the probabilities at once in 0.1 seconds. So this is the power, and this is why it appears to be faster, because technically in this job scenario, it is faster. Not processing faster, it's just able to handle all possibilities at once. And so what happens is it will process all of these, and it will use something called the Grover's algorithm to shed out the knots. So it's going to look at each probability and say, it will rate the answers as far as which ones are most likely to not be the correct answer, and it will spit out the 4 or 5 that are probably the right answer. And so in this case, once we run it through Grover's algorithm, we end up with 3. I love qubits. 8 is the password. So this is the Grover diffusion operator, or the algorithm that it uses up here. And then you can see, with this repeat function right here, you can go ahead and resubmit the job either through the quantum system, or you can submit it to a classical computer for the small work, or you can just manually try your different possibilities. But this is an example of how Grover's algorithm will shed out the knots. So anything below the X axis here are your knots, and anything above, it's going to get these ratings on most probable. And this is our most probable candidate right here. And I would say that that's probably I love qubits 8, and that's our password. Okay. Used this one before. On a classical computer, if I was trying to find my way through the maze, I would have to try option A, then B, then C, then D, until I finally found my way to the end of the maze. But if I ran it through quantum computing, I can submit all possibilities at one time and be able to hustle right to the very end and get to my answer. So what? So what does this mean? So what this means is classical computers are always going to have a place, at least in our lifetime and probably our kids' lifetime, always have a place for us. And they'll be doing the bulk of the work as far as the day-to-day types of computing things. They're not going away anytime in the near future. And so when I hear somebody say, well, quantum computers are going to replace classical computers, that's not true, at least not in the next long time. You're really looking at what types of jobs do you put into a quantum computer. And this is a type of, I'm going to make some of this up, but the big, bulky questions that mankind has had for a long time that are going to take forever to solve on a classical system. What is the cure for AIDS? What is the cure for, there's 280 inbound missiles coming in. What are the best trajectories to defend our country with? Stock market. Of all the possibilities and all the input points that affect business or stock price or the performance of a company, can we load all of those probabilities in once and determine our best in the stock market? And by the way, can we loading them in additions? So this is where a quantum system is going to just work and work. So this is pretty enticing for the financial sector. There is some talk out there that there are quantum financial systems in place. They're not. There's no quantum computer system up and these types of decisions. They're being experimented with. Will be here someday, pretty soon. But, and there are some companies call their quantum, but they're not based. They're classical systems that just wow people. So that's out there. So if I look at the process and I look at classical encryption, you know, if I was to give you the color brown, as I said, you know, unlock this password or unlock a second where we want to move information back and forth in an encrypted way, and I'm going to, your encryption key is brown. There's a lot of colors that produce the color brown that you can mix together. So if I were to say 9 times 9 is 8, then we know that that's a one-way function. That's a math term. It's a one-way function. 9 times 9 is equal to 81. If I were to say, take the number 81 and factor it out and me the numbers create 81. Well, we get that off top of our head. But when you get to numbers that are really, really large, like 256, and we say, and by the way, the primers, even including the decimal points, it becomes very, very difficult to unwind a very 256 number. And so it's easy one way, but it's very difficult the opposite way. It's where it gets named a one-way function. When something is very easy, but extremely difficult to unwind the other way. So when we talk about encryption and we talk about encryption, today's computers, can they do it? Yeah, they can do it. The amount of time and horsepower it takes is pretty incredible. As a matter of fact, I used this slide time before, and this classical algorithm take 10 years to run and take a lot of power and that types of things. To where a quantum algorithm can run the same equation. We're just going to sample model here. What would take, you know, a billion years on a classical algorithm, a quantum could, in theory, break that in about 6 hours with a lot of power. So how does one-way encryption work when we talk quantum encryption and methodologies? If we take these or electrons and we pass them through a polarization screen, so that we set up a screen and we set these spinning electrons or photons to our partner, only certain photons are going through that screening. They're going to be straight down, or they're vertical, or they could be at a 45-degree angle, and they could be horizontal. So we just call this screening 45 and horizontal, or some people might call that 40 degrees a diagonal. In the lower left-hand corner, you'll see a photon being sent through a screen, and it's a polarizing filter. And once it comes through that photon, in this case is having a diagonal, and that's what that little hash mark is there. It's saying that photon came, it did not bounce off the screen, it passed through at a 45. So we know that that spinning counter electron is through safety at a 45 angle. The other screen is just another look at how these screens look as well with if we're using light waves. And by the way, it doesn't have to be light waves. There's ways of doing this. I'm trying to keep it somewhat basic. So in quantum encryption, Bob and Eve. So Alice is white hat, and Eve is the bad guy, trying to figure out what type of encryption in the quantum system. Okay, so typically you'd have a public and key that are, and we all networks with our, but in quantum, Alice is going to use a random sequence to send these photons through the screening process that I just talked about. And when they come through, Bob will also use a random detector, and he's going to, each one, is this is correct? He's going to shift his screening from vertical to horizontal to diagonal, and going to test these cubes coming through one at a time. And when he successfully grabs vertical, so if she screens through, it's good. And it's either going to be a 1 or an O because it's either spinning down. He knows that's good. When he failed to capture what she sent to him in correct, he sheds that off. It's not visible. There's a series of spin up, spin down, and spin diagonals that are moving through a set is identified. Anything fails is added. It ends up with a shared key. So it's all about the randomness of when X sends. They determine through random acts, they determine what that correct basis key is. Somebody is eavesdropping just through the act of a being. They will distort and change the polarization of a bit, and Bob will know that somebody has tampered. This is probably the most important piece of this whole thing. Let me take a look at this. These are kind of complex, and I can certainly share these slides if you'd like. This is an example of bits being sent, okay? And this is one more example of how these different spin up, spin or diagonal filter work. We end up with what's called a sifted key. This bottom line, that's after. John, can you hear me?
We can. You're still breaking in and out. I don't think it's how close you're holding the mic to your mouth. It's again the network connection.
I'm gonna completely exit right back in. Guys,
if you stop your video portion, it might help.
Yeah, that's consuming bandwidth right there. Just, yeah, turn off your video. We don't need to see your video. Let's try that. Yep.
Okay.
Good call.
Okay, how's this?
Yep.
Am I okay now?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, excellent. This is just another example. This is a lot to take in at one time. This is just another example of the qubits that are moving toward Bob. And again, if the bad guy gets in here, they will just. University of Calgary has successfully proven that this approach has worked 200 meters. I was reading something today that somebody says that they've got to 20 kilometers now. But if you this, will we get a sifted key at the bottom? Somebody has to tell us what that key set is. How does Alice? He's going to have to call that her. I mean, it kind of, this has got to be super secure because handing Alice what that SIF key is. So this is perfect. And there's a lot of things that are being worked on sifted key area, how to transmit that perfect key back to Alice. But it's not perfect yet. It isn't 100% means success, but I see that there's success. When we talk about Calgary, Calgary has taken this one more and they're saying rather than just horizontal, they're looking at the entire sphere of probabilities in a photon or electron, and they're identifying a patch that can be sent. So this is some research that's underway. It looks very promising, and it really takes the security of this thing and pull it off. It will really take the security of this thing through the roof. Be very hard to break this. Okay. Take all these timelines are done by people that are trying to read tea leaves. They're saying that quantum safe security will be placed by 2026. That's probably true, but how good is it really? But I'm just trying to give you a sense of the timelines and where we are with this. And if I talk about the international race from supremacy, quantum supremacy is kind of an agitator to me. I said, can we quit talking about that, about leapfrog? Because that's what's really happening. There's so much going on in this space right now that organizations and academia are all leapfrogging over the top of each other. This right here, this National Strategic Overview of Quantum Information Science, under the President of the United States, is very active. And go out and do research about where the United States stands against our potential competitors, enemies, whatever you want to call it. And you look at some other unfriendly countries that are in this space. We have a lot of information out what we're doing in the United States, but we don't fill everything. And China is really spending a lot of their processes and procedures in the quantum world to a larger degree than we are. So you get very little out of Sandias, Los Alamos. You get a lot of Canada and MIT. You get a lot of nice to knows out of this organization at the government level, but there's probably a lot going on that we don't know about, and that thing. And then here's a whole group. This is a sample of companies that are working in this space, and the list keeps growing bigger and bigger. Many of you are probably getting invited to seminars and Zoom calls, and it's really heating up because it's interesting. It's a lot to learn about, and it really is what's taking place and setting the pace for the future. A lot of good articles over at MIT, and University of Chicago is doing a lot in the entanglement space as well. Dark matter actually found its way to make it on slide. We'll see. Still trying to define dark matter and energy actually is, but they do seem to think that there's going to be a place for dark matter in the world. Okay, so I was talking about companies, institutions, and thought leaders. If you look at this finance here, they're probably ways to be the beneficiaries of quantum systems, both medium and long term, and then see down all the way down to insurance and consumer goods. So these are the highs right here, and to me, the 5 top emerging cryptography solutions. Again, this is just a hand. First started looking at 10 years ago, it was, and now there's thousands. Some of the startups are getting ranked now. I remember Ariba was coming out around .com, and it was the thing to keep an eye on. So we'll see how all this shakes out, but this is a nice to know who's from who to keep an eye on. This is just one more. This is really cut the volume and the growth. So here, financial services, your cybersecurity and computer sciences. Those are the high growth, high volume implementers and users and early adopters of quantum systems. This chemicals and pharma, frankly, I was surprised that this wasn't in this upper right quadrant group. There's so much in the chemical area. If you ever talk to a chemical engineer, physics professional, this is a godsend that they can run a lot of different scenarios at the same time. So I would think a year from now, this chemicals and pharma is probably going to join the right-hand quadrant. This is as good of 2018, but it's a good trend line, and you can see China is out in the patent. Part of this is China grabbing patents. Doesn't necessarily mean that the US is behind. It's just from a patent view, China is really taken off, but it shows you that China is putting into this, and the US as well. Here's just some these influencers and thought leaders. This is a nice mix of the based on patents and who's applying in the quantum world. Again, the Chinese are dominating the intellectual space. United is going on, as well as United States, and you can see a pretty good momentum here of the amount of money and research that's being put into this. The University of Bristol has been working on cryptography, particularly in the transmission space, to find new ways to use this quantum entanglement notion to be able to transmit. So they'd be on the transmit side of this, and right here they're talking about using the multiplexing as a key factor, and we all know what multiplexing is. So I'm watching my clock here. In conclusion, some takeaways and tips to stay up to date, and I know that I hustled through this. Here are some companies, that are the significant advancements are over here by category, and then some early adopters are over here. These are, I could run a list of thousands, as I mentioned, but there is a lot going on here. And look at this down here, Morgan Stanley. So Morgan Stanley is even really interested in quantum systems and what that means to get that edge on the trading platforms around the world. You can see military in here, some consumer goods, and telecommunications as well. So how to stay up to date? There are a ton of books that are out there. You can take it from quantum systems for dummies all the way through very advanced applied calculus and all of the math that goes in there. Here's some online popular science things. I mean, if you just want somebody to boil down everything that I said into really simple language, the Physics Girl Smarter Every Day, basically you can go Google this stuff, or you could do a search in YouTube and come up with your favorite flavor. But what I'm trying to get at here is that there is a wide array of resources that are out there that if you're saying, I didn't even know anything about quantum until Jim started talking that night, it sounds interesting, I want to know more. You can take it at baby step level, or you can take it at very, very advanced level. It's just the whole world is cranking out a lot of research in this area. This is pretty, not only talk about the technical side of it, also the applications, the business as well. And for those who like to hang out on the keyboard and try the IBM Quantum Experience, there's an open access. You can actually set up jobs and submit them to the IBM Quantum or the Q. And you can even sign up for premium access and pay a fee, and you can get more than a minute or 2 minutes. So you would submit jobs to a quantum system the same way that we used to submit jobs to mainframe. That's kind of how I have it positioned in my mind, is you set up a job and then you submit it and let the quantum system run it for you, and you can play with it. So there's a lot of lab type things that allow you to do that. So if this is the first time you've read about quantum mechanics, you know, or the 1000th time, it's just something, quantum mechanics is something that you baby step your way through, as I mentioned. And I would suggest, rather than trying to figure out what it does and where the applications are, I would start at the physics level and say, what is an electron? What is a photon? What is spin? What is spin up, spin down? And I would work my upward into, so how does this apply to quantum systems? What do they look like? How do they behave? Who are the key players? And what does this mean going forward? So says we've covered a lot today. This is my cell phone. You guys, if I ran through this too quick, I was a little short on time. This is my cell phone. You want to give me a call? I'd be glad to kind of take it at a more easygoing pace and answer any questions that you have. And then I do have something on entanglement here that if somebody wants this deck and I can shoot that out, I've included that in the appendix as well. So there you go, John.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate you putting this together, and it's very in-depth information. I think a lot of people in the chat were kind of going back and forth interested in your topic, so I think it hit the mark. I really appreciate you putting it together.